Inner joins build on top of cross joins. Logically, you can think of an inner join as just a cross join with an additional step that follows to remove rows that don't meet some filter condition. So an inner join is just a cross join and then a filter. It's the most common type of join that you're going to be using, so let's take a look at an example and get familiar with it. Jumping over to our entity relationship diagram, and we can see that each rental has a customer ID, which refers to the customer who rented out the film. We want to write a query where we want to show for each rental the actual customer's first name and last name, which is stored in the customer table. And we're going to use an inner join to do that. We'll start by saying select star from rental. And what we want to do now is inner join the customer table. And the join condition that we're going to set up is where the rental's customer ID is equal to the customer table customer ID. Let's run that query and have a look at the output. And what we might do as well is restrict some of the columns to just those that we're interested in looking at. So let's pull out the rental date. Let's get the first name of the customer and the last name of the customer. So what's actually happened here is a cross join has initially been performed between the rental table and the customer table. So each row in the rental table was paired with each row in the customer table. But then there was an additional filter step that was performed after that, where the only rows that were kept, the only rows that appear in our output, are where the rental's customer ID is equal to the customer's customer ID. And if they didn't match, then that row got filtered from our output. When it comes down to it though, the easiest way to think about this is that we've mapped every customer ID from the rental table over to an actual customer in the customer table. So when those IDs matched, we pulled in the customer table to make it available to us. So you can think of an inner join when performed on a foreign key column to essentially just be resolving this ID into the appropriate record in the actual customer table. That's the simple way to think about it. Obviously, we now know as well that behind the scenes what actually happened was a cross join was performed between the rental table and the customer table, and then the only rows that got kept were when the customer ID matches. But when you're looking at the rental table and the customer table, where there's a foreign key relationship on that customer ID column, there's only ever one row that matches. There's only ever one customer with a particular customer ID. So the simple shortcut way of thinking about it is that we just pulled in the right customer record and we appended it to the rental table. It's important to remember though that if that join condition doesn't match, then the row doesn't actually appear in the output. So it's not possible in this case with this relationship between the rental table and the customer table. But if the rental table had a customer ID that didn't exist in the customer table, then that rental wouldn't appear in our output at all. Even though we're saying from rental and we're inner joining another table onto that rental table, because the customer ID doesn't exist, that rental doesn't appear in our output at all. Let's look at an example now where we can see this row filtering aspect in more detail. Jumping over to our ERD, what we're going to be looking at is the film table and the film actor table. So a film table just stores the films, and the film actor table stores the actors for each film. And to draw attention to this row filtering aspect, I'm going to draw your attention to a particular film. And that film has an ID of 803. The film is called Slacker Liaisons. And what's interesting about this film is if we have a look in the film actor table, this film has no actors stored against it. There's only a couple of films like that in the table, but this is one of them. So if we now then write a query where what we do is we start with the film table and we inner join the film actor table onto this film table. And we want to join them on that film ID. We can run that query. And so for every film that's joined the actor table onto it, where the actor IDs match, where the film IDs match. What we would find when we look at the output is that that film with the ID 803 doesn't appear at all. It's gone from the output. And that's because even though that film is in the film table, when we inner joined the film actor table onto that, which doesn't have any records for that particular film, the inner join resulted in that film being filtered out completely. For most queries that you're going to be writing, that's fine, and the inner join will be your go-to join. It's the most used join that you use. And that's because most of the time, what you're often doing is just joining on some foreign key, where you know that the related entity is stored in another table. The foreign key relationship enforces that integrity. But there are some queries where you do want to perform a join, but you don't want to drop rows from your original table where there's no match. And we're going to be looking at that topic coming up when we talk about outer joins. Sometimes you'll find when you're joining tables that the information you want is not just a single table hop away, but you actually have to jump through multiple tables to get to the actual data that you want. For example, if we have a look at our ERD, what if we wanted to write a query where for each customer we wanted to list their name and then the city and country that they're in? Let's look at the tables that would get us there. So each customer has an address, and that's listed as an address ID, and that refers to IDs in this address table. Inside here, each address has a city ID, and so that refers to records in the city table. And each city has a country ID, and then that refers to records in the country table where the actual country name is listed. So if we wanted to write this query, we actually have to join multiple tables together to finally get at the city name and the country name that we want to output. Let's work on this query together and build it up one step at a time. So we'll just start with saying select star initially, and it all starts in the customer table. And what we want to do is inner join onto that the address table. And we join on the address ID. Let's run that. That seems to be working. Scroll along in our output, and we can see we've joined up the address table now. What we now want to do is hop on over to the city table. And we can do that by now setting up another inner join. Let's check that out. And let's have a look at our output. So now we've got addresses, and then now we also have the city information as well. There's one last bit of information that we're missing, which is the actual country name. To get that, we need to join up the country table. And let's run that. And you can see the mistake we've made here is that we just forgot to use the alias that we introduced. Let's try that again. Okay, now that works. So let's see, first name, last name, address, cities. Okay, and now we've finally got the country. Now let's just prune it down and select the particular columns that we actually wanted. And I want the actual city name. And I want the country name too. Let's run that. And I'll just give this column a nice alias name. Run that again. Okay, so now we finally have, for each customer, the city and country that they're based out of. Just a note as well that I always prefer to explicitly type out inner join, but you can actually just drop off the inner part. By default, if you just specify join, that implicitly performs an inner join. So you can run that and you get the same result. I like to spell it out explicitly though, just to avoid any confusion and make my code clearer and easier to read. One syntax that you might see quite often as well is whenever you're joining two tables and the column that you're joining on has the same name in both tables, and you're performing an equality join. So we're doing that here. We're joining from the customer to the address table, and we're joining on the address ID column. And actually, that's the same with all of the inner joins that we're doing here. So city ID, country ID. There's a less verbose syntax that you can use. Instead of specifying out this full join condition like this, you can simply say using, and in this case, we're using the address ID column. In this case, we're using the city ID column. And in this case, we're using the country ID column. And I can run that, and I'll get exactly the same result. In general, when I'm writing queries, I actually tend to use the full, more verbose way. But you'll absolutely see, if you look around online, a lot of examples of people using this simpler using syntax. It's quite common as well. One final thing to point out is that if you look around at online examples of people doing inner joins, sometimes you'll come across people using an older syntax for inner joins. It still works and it's still supported. It's not the modern way to write inner joins, but it works exactly the same. And so it's important to be familiar with it because, again, you'll come across it quite a lot online when looking at code examples. Just to demonstrate it, what I'll do is write up a query that again joins that rental table with the customer table. So scrolling back over here, we're going to join the rental table and the customer table, and we'll join them on the customer ID. So I'll say select star from rental. And what it actually uses is initially that cross-join syntax. So that looks like a cross-join right now, doesn't it? But then it also specifies a where condition, and it says where. That's the older style of writing out an inner join. What's interesting about this older style is that it's actually quite explicit about the whole idea that an inner join is really just a cross-join followed by row filtering. In some sense, it's kind of nice in that way because it makes it very explicit what the underlying behavior is. But generally, we don't use this syntax anymore, and you'll want to stick to using the more modern way, inner join with using or on.